Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about how to edit even the shittiest photograph of your artwork and make it actually look pretty decent. When I was in high school and having to take photographs of my artwork for the first time, I was really bad at it. I didn't know anything about white balance. I couldn't take a straight shot to save my life, so all of my photographs were horrible. And rather than learn how to use a camera properly, my idea was to learn how to edit all of these terrible photos into something better. Don't know why, but that was my strategy, and I did this for years. So after so many years of editing terrible photographs, I've learned a thing or two, and I figured I would share these tips and tricks today with you guys. As a test subject today, we're going to be using a print of this painting by Kelsey J. Beckett. It's a very lovely painting, but I've put it in the worst circumstances possible. We have this guest bedroom that gets like no natural lighting. It only gets the lighting that's on the ceiling, which is tungsten lighting. Tungsten is this golden light that you see in a lot of homes, and it casts this really kind of ugly glow. It's also on the floor and it's crooked and there's a pencil on top of it. I tried to do the worst that I could possibly do. So here is the photo that I took that we're going to be editing today, and ideally we're going to make it as close as possible to the photograph that is on Kelsey J. Beckett's website, which we're just going to assume is the best photo possible of her artwork. That is the goal. We are going to try to make this terrible photo look like her really amazing photo. Are we going to actually 100% do that? No, but you will be very surprised at how close you can take that shitty photo and make it look something really good. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to pop this photo into Photoshop, which by the way, this whole tutorial is very Photoshop based, just letting you know. And the first thing I do is create a new layer on top and just use the paint tool and scribble on some pure white. We're going to be using this as a guide to figure out how the white of the border is going to match the pure white, because that's ultimately the goal. Because this is tungsten lighting, we have a lot of yellow to kill. So having that white there is going to be kind of our compass in the night. So a lot of this is using the color balance tool, which you can get to either by going to the top image adjustment color balance, or at the bottom of the layers palette, you'll see that little like half moon kind of icon, and you can just scroll through there and get to the color balance chart. Color balance is really nice because you can individually go to highlights, midtones, shadows, and tweak the colors. So I went through there and tried my hardest to cancel out a lot of the yellow by making it more blue, etc. So you'll see me use that a lot, like throughout this video. I also have a curves tool, which is really good at kind of bringing out the highlights and bringing back the shadows and things like that. In this piece, because it is really dark, that was one of the things that I had to address pretty quickly was, okay, I need to bring some light up and then figure things out. As I'm tweaking the colors, I'm trying to keep in mind the white that's next to it, and I'm like, okay, so the white over here doesn't look nearly as white as that. What do I need to do to cancel that out? If you're going to take a shitty photo, really try to get some natural white in there, like a white piece of paper next to it or something, because that white will save you. Because once the white is correct, you'll know that the rest of the painting is pretty darn good. I also am using the levels tool. Again, all of this can be found in image adjustments or at the bottom of the layers palette. And I'm pulling up the whites, bringing back the midtones and the shadows a little bit, kind of softening it a little bit. And as you can see, now the border is starting to look really close to the white. And whenever I want to make an adjustment, rather than, create a whole new adjustment layer, I just go back into the color balance layer and tweak and tweak. These are all tiny tweaks. This video is sped up quite a bit. Don't try to rush it. So the next thing is this really neat tool called the perspective crop tool. So normally with a regular crop, you're just kind of boxing it in, but the perspective crop tool actually takes, a slightly wonky square or whatever and warps it ever so slightly to become an actual perfect box, which is amazing, and I only recently discovered. So kudos to Photoshop for putting that in. All you have to do is go to the crop tool and you right click it and you'll see the perspective crop tool just pop up. So this tool isn't 100% perfect. So some of what I'm doing right now is trying to get the lines as even as possible and cut out some of the black edges that were created during the perspective crop process. Sometimes it does that, but just by going back and undoing and making these tiny little adjustments, I'm getting it decently close. One thing that will immediately, like even from a distance, kind of show that this was a shitty photo is if the lines are not straight. So that is something that you want to focus on. Now to get rid of this ugly ass pencil, which had no business being here to begin with, I'm using the clone tool, which looks like a little stamp, and holding down the Alt key on the area that I want it to look like, so the blue, and then kind of painting over where the pencil is, and also doing the same thing in the white area. So it's taking a copy of the area that was around it and kind of putting it in the new area. This also takes some time, and you have to be very careful because as you can see, there is kind of a gradation in the blue tones. It gets a little lighter towards her hair and a little darker towards the edges. So I don't want to take the lighter areas and put them in the darker areas because it's going to look like a hot mess and everyone's going to be able to tell. And I'm also trying to cancel out the reflected light that was coming off of the hot pink pencil. You can see that there was like a little bit of that light pink glow. So now I've got this edge that I'm not going to be able to clone very successfully. So I'm taking the rectangular tool and copying a little section that's pretty good. I'm going to select, modify, feather. I'm going to feather that selection just a little bit because I want it to look like I copied and pasted a selection on top of it. I'm just going to drag it on top, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit and also use the arrow keys to get it really perfectly lined up so that it looks nice and clean. And boom, you can barely tell that that was edited, which is pretty neat. Of course, as I was zooming in to do that, I realized that there were some tiny little black edges and I needed to tweak some things. A lot of this process is just going back and forth, doing the same thing over and over again to get things as good as you can possibly get. The next thing I'm doing is using the healing brush or the healing stamp, whatever it's called, and I'm getting rid of the yellow splotches in the corners of this painting. When I got this print, I didn't really know how to treat it well, and it's gotten discoloration in some areas. That's my fault. But just by using this tool, you're just kind of like clicking on the areas and it's taking samples of the pixels next to it and kind of scrambling it on top of the ugly pixels and making it disappear. This tool is amazing. If you want to just like edit out a zit on your face or something, this is like, or if you've got like a pencil shaving that's in the way or whatever, you can just literally in a couple clicks get rid of it. So that's what I was doing to kind of get rid of those little yellow uglies that were kind of looking bad around the sides. And of course, I'm still trying to get the angles just so. And one of the tricks that I use is sometimes I'll use the transform tool to make it look right. So by clicking Control A to select the whole thing and then Control T for transform, or you can go to edit transform, you'll see warp and perspective. Perspective is probably the better one for this rather than warp, but I think either or could probably work. Anyway, so you hit those tools and then you can make these tiny tweaks to get the lines to line up just so. Of course, you're going to want to actually like take that layer that had our border and merge it to the background so that it's not getting in the way. You're just going to make tiny tweaks. The perspective in the warp tool should be used very sparingly because you don't want to warp her whole face. You don't want to warp the whole thing. But if you're only moving it like a few pixels, no one will ever tell that this image was slightly skewed. And it saves us a lot of work in having to like crop and tweak and do all that other crap. Once I'm done with that, I do kind of zoom in and I use the healing brush tool on a few other areas just to kind of make sure that the cloning process when I got rid of that pencil are completely hidden, that there's no clear like paint mark, clone, stamp, whatever things. Trying to make sure that everything looks as natural as physically possible. And now I believe I'm going back into color adjusting and figuring things out. I've created another color balance on top of the original one, just because I didn't want to screw with the original one too much, and I felt like I was going to make some fine adjustments anyway. I created a vibrance layer, which the vibrance layer is significantly better than saturation, guys. Way better. Vibrance kind of creates more richness. It does bring up the saturation, but unlike the saturation tool where like it goes really crazy and intense way too quickly, the vibrance tool is like a more mature version. So using that to kind of bring back some of the tones that were lost through the color balance process was really important. Also in the curves layer, so the curves layer is great because it can adjust the shadows and the midtones and the highlights using black and white. But if you go to the top, there's a drop-down menu. It starts off, I believe, with black and white, but if you click on it, you can select the reds, greens, blues, and you can actually use the curves layer to adjust those colors specifically. It's kind of like using the color balance tool, but it's a little bit more powerful, and I can make some really subtle tweaks with that as well. So yeah, it's a lot of color tweaking. One of the things that's difficult about this piece is that the background is a pretty like nice bright blue, and her skin and her hair and everything is really pink. So every time that I tried to bring out the blue, I was taking red out of her face and vice versa. So that was one of the challenges of this piece. Once I had the color balance to a point where I liked it pretty well, I noticed that her signature in the lower right corner was completely exposed. The exposure was too high, you couldn't see it, so I'm using the burn tool on the background layer and bringing it back. Unfortunately, the burn tool also brought back that ugly yellow because it is quote unquote protecting the tones. So in order to get the signature, I needed to somehow also get rid of the yellow. You'll see me here trying to like use the black and white tool and stuff, but that created some weird things. So in the end, I think what I ended up doing was desaturating it just a hair, just to kind of kill the yellow as best as I can without killing all the white. And then I also created another layer on top of it, and using my pen tool in pure white, stamped some areas of white and then made that layer like an overlay or soft light layer and softening it just a touch, just to kind of kill the yellow. There wasn't any real way that I could completely get rid of it, at least so I know. But that way I was able to keep the signature as best as I possibly could without revealing the ugliness that's underneath. Another thing I sometimes do is if I notice that there's a slight cast shadow, such as in that lower left-hand corner, I'll use the gradient tool in pure white and I'll just drag it over the area, and then I just make that layer an overlay or a soft light and bring it down, and that will kill the shadow in that one particular area. Again, just using the healing brush to kind of go through and make those last couple of tweaks. And at this point, I thought that I was done. So let's go back to the original. Yep, pretty ugly. It's amazing what we started with, and this is where we ended. Rather than just calling it a day, it's always good to kind of leave it alone and then come back with fresh eyes. So I saved this as a Photoshop file because I wanted to make sure that if I needed to make an adjustment later, that I had all of my layers at the ready. And I also saved it as a JPEG. JPEGs are not the devil. And then I pulled up the Kelsey J. Beckett's photo from her website, and I did a little bit of comparison, and I realized, oh shit, it's not quite as good as I want. So I ended up opening up the JPEG file one more time and then just doing a couple little tweaks on top of it just to really make sure that it looked good. You'll see me kind of fiddling around with like the curves and the levels and all that other stuff, and it wasn't really successful. What ended up being the successful thing was actually selecting the background. Remember what I was talking about with the blues and the reds kind of fighting each other and not really being able to get both? Yeah, this is where this came in handy. So first I tried to use select color range and tried to select the background that way. It didn't really end up working too well. So then I ended up using just the magic select tool, which is that little like sparkly wand tool kind of towards the top of the tool palette, whatever it's called. So I used that and I just selected the blue in the background, making sure that I got all the little nooks and crannies kind of behind her hair and stuff like that. And then all I have to do is hit Control U, which brings up the hue saturation palette. So I want to bring it more cyan because it was looking a little too warm, and presto changeo, I was able to make the background look way more cyan, a little bit more bright, without affecting her skin tone, without making her look too washed out like I was struggling with before. I can also tweak the saturation and the lightness and stuff like that, but I just need to make tiny adjustments. So I'm going to go back to that selection and go select inverse because now I want to work on her face and stuff, and do the same thing, click Control U, but now slide the hue so that it looks a little bit more warm, just a little bit more pink, because that's what the original in the painting looked like. So just by editing that, boom, we have our final image. I think I did go through with just a couple more tweaks here and there, but we now have the final. So let's go back all the way to the beginning and see what we started with. Again, it's just as horrible as I could possibly make it. Hopefully your photos are not this bad, but Lord knows things happen. And now we're going to see the final version that I just created. So here's the version that we created in Photoshop. Looks pretty darn good if I say so myself. I can still see some areas that need just a hair bit of work, but that's okay. And now this is the version that's on Kelsey J. Beckett's website. There is no perfect photo in the world that's going to perfectly replicate her painting, but as you can see, our photo looks decently similar to the photo that's on our website. You can see that hers is a little bit more desaturated, but ours is not that bad, and I've seen the print in my own two eyes. I think this is similar enough that it's a pretty darn good job. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful. If you have any other little Photoshop tips and tricks, leave them down below, and stay tuned because next week I will be showing you guys how to take an actual good photo, since you probably don't want to go through what I just did trying to edit this mess. Anyway, you can catch me on Instagram and Tumblr at Biana Bova. My Etsy is going to be launching any day now, which is also Biana Bova, and you can also subscribe or like this video if you prefer. Anyway, see you in the next video. Goodbye.